What are we supposed to go and find a tree? I mean, what are we, saving the world from some great evil now?
We are talking about the movie Anna 2, Freaky Links. This one is directed by Michael Crum and written by Gerald Crum, who also has a role in the movie. Obviously following on from the original movie just called Anna, which I'll say I have not seen. This is, I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up having its name changed, because the Anna, as I understand it, from the original movie was like a kind of Annabelle style kind of haunted doll. Nothing to do with it in this film. It makes a brief appearance at the beginning, but the actual movie has nothing to do with it. So I wouldn't be surprised if this movie has a title change at some point. So what is this actually about then? So we follow characters from the original movie, I'm making the assumption, because they are references to it. And they are essentially two groups of paranormal investigators, kind of amateur paranormal investigators / scam artists. And they get kind of a lead on this haunted amusement park, I think it is, or something like that. So they kind of team up with this kind of rival group, and then end up going to this kind of this particular kind of area, and inevitably strange things start to happen. There seems to be a very definite malevolent kind of paranormal force there, and the movie is a very low budget film, but definitely has inspirations from, most notably I felt, the Evil Dead series, certainly the first two films. But also Ghostbusters, and maybe also Stanley Kubrick as well, to a certain degree. There's there's kind of elements of that there as well. So what do I think of this film? So let's talk about the positives first of all. So for me, the big thing here was obviously working on a low budget. You have to be creative in regards to what you do, and I feel obviously this budget's clearly very low on this film. But I do feel here that filmmakers do have this kind of guerrilla style filmmaking, like you would have seen, especially in the first Evil Dead film, that is very kind of apparent, that's very kind of obviously influenced by that movie and movies of that ilk. So you can kind of see this kind of this type of thing on display here. I don't think it's quite as successful as the obviously Evil Dead, which obviously went on to become very widely regarded. But nonetheless, there is still that kind of that guerrilla style filmmaking, and I feel there's influences to be had from that movie. I got to say, I think some of the effects here were pretty good. Some in regards to kind of some of the makeup effects and the practical work here. I feel actually, for a kind of low budget movie, they did a pretty good job and actually had some quite good kind of sequences where the effects look quite good. I've got to say the camera work as well. I actually thought the camera work here was quite inventive, and again this is coming from that kind of Sam Raimi influence, with a kind of a very kind of kinetic kind of style camera work. As well as obviously again the influences are very kind of plain to see there. Thought the music was quite good. The actual sound design here was quite good. I mean, sometimes I think the effects, like the Foley effects, are a little bit OTT, almost as like a video game. When someone's walking, they go. I don't know. Sometimes the sound effects were a little bit over the top, but the music was good, and I thought the sound editing and stuff like that. You could hear people kind of clearly, things like that. So the sound design I thought was good. The acting. For a kind of a low-budget schlocky film, which is obviously what it's trying to be, I don't think it was too bad. From some characters, our kind of female lead, I think, is probably the best actor here. But there are instances where people are playing very kind of outwardly kind of comedic kind of characters, and they come across as like essentially cartoons to a certain degree, which we'll come on to. But as a whole, for a kind of a low budget horror comedy, it was just about okay, I think, in regards to kind of some of the acting here. And I feel there's a lot of ideas here. This is one of these films where I feel there's kind of lots of potential. So what doesn't work for me? So a couple of big things for me that I feel could be easily remedied. The film is way too long, and there's stuff to cut out here. There's a lot of extended sequences where it goes on for too long, and I'll come on to another bit where I feel which could make a difference to the film as well. But whatever, I feel this movie could be sort of at least 15 to 20 minutes shorter. It's too long in its current kind of its current form. The other thing I would say is this movie is grossly underlit. So there's this movie, a lot of the time the scenes are way too dark. There's just not enough lighting in even kind of interior shots in a building and stuff like that. It always has this kind of like this dingy look, and it's not something where you can just kind of up the brightness digitally. They need more lights in the actual production itself. It just looks very, very underlit. The next thing, I think the editor needs to be looked at a little bit here, because the editing here is very erratic. So there's lots of kind of strange edits. For example, we'll have like just a regular shot, and then there'll be a couple of like frames cut out, so people will jump ahead a little bit and kind of done it again. And I thought because I was watching this on a screener, and I thought my screener was sticking. So there's also lots of kind of some works, some transitions from scene to a scene. But I feel like the editor is just gone a little bit crazy and kind of trying to do all these kind of different techniques and have lots of kind of different weird edits, and it's noticeable. So you kind of, for me personally, when you watch a film, you want it to flow seamlessly into one scene and the other. And to me, the editing here is too abrasive, so you notice it. And to me, that's not a good edit, because you notice these strange kind of like edits that want to be kind of somewhat artistic, but ultimately it pulls you out of the film because they're trying to kind of maybe be a bit too clever with it, and it kind of defeats the purpose. It kind of ultimately takes you out the kind of the flow of the story. So then we can actually come on to the kind of the story and the actual the way I feel the film is kind of put on screen. Now, this next bit may be subjective. So this critique is more of a subjective critique. For me, the humour here didn't work. I would have thought it would have been better to dial back on some of the kind of the goofy humour. And again, I'm thinking this is coming from maybe watching kind of Sam Raimi do his kind of Three Stooges thing. But to me, the humour didn't work. It just came across as very kind of juvenile and kind of idiotic, and it made characters seem, people wouldn't simply be that kind of that dumb in a realistic, in a kind of a real world. Even a kind of a hyper reality like this film kind of says, it just makes people think that they're just too dumb to be believable as a living human character. So again, if you were making a spoof film, then this kind of thing would fly. But if you're making a story that has horror elements, and you actually want to have horror elements in it that are, freaky or scary or gross or whatever, then I feel having just very kind of outlandish OTT humour doesn't work. You can have clever writing, you can have a few jokes, I think, but having characters just be very kind of over the top, kind of dumb and things like that, and say ridiculous things, I don't know, it doesn't work for me. And also the beginning part of this film, I feel is one part where I feel this movie could have been cut down a lot, because there's a lot of time here having gags, and I don't think these gags work. Like, if that's subjective, it may just be me. I don't think it works. I think the Crum, I'm assuming brothers, do have maybe a knack for a potential horror, but I don't know if comedy is in their wheelhouse. So I would maybe kind of stay away from that a little bit. It would be my advice, or at least get someone else to do another write. Maybe that's what I would suggest is having a second writer on this to do some rewrites, because it's just one person's, attempt, or a brother's, between a writer and director, and I don't know if it comes across what one person might think it works well. I don't know. It's a general audience, and I'm trying to think of what general audiences will think of this. I don't think it works. So the actual story as well, I've got to say, the narrative is quite confusing. So like I said, I haven't watched the first Anna, and there's a lot of references to that movie. And I mean, I've watched enough films where I can kind of pick up what's happening, but maybe as a new viewer, I feel that may be a little confusing. And then we actually get into, I guess, the bulk of this story, and I don't know. To me, it didn't really. The narrative flow didn't really make a lot of sense to me in regards to this kind of story about this kind of amusement park and stuff like that. So it just looks like some kind of like some shacks with some floodlights. Not much of an amusement park, if you ask me. So I thought that the actual narrative gets a bit modern, and I put a lot of that down to unnecessarily long scenes and the editing as well. So for me, I have to say this film shows a lot of potential in regards to future filmmaking, in regards to something like a potential kind of Evil Dead style thing, but as a piece of entertainment. And I try to explain how I would rate this. I'm thinking about it, if the average person picking this up in a supermarket, what are they going to think about it? Just your average kind of viewer ultimately. I do not think it would be a particularly entertaining film for them. There are elements here that I feel, if you are more of a hardcore horror fan, that you kind of appreciate the kind of the B-movie, the schlockiness of it. But like I've said, there are some elements here that I feel even kind of would put people like that off as well, being kind of the length of it, the underlighting, that kind of stuff. So this for me is almost like a work in progress of the people involved here. And I feel that there is potential for these guys to kind of to go on to do bigger and better things. But I would get more people involved in the creative process. It would be my takeaway here, because I do feel that would be. It looks like they've tried to cram lots of stuff in. They wanted to put lots of stuff in, but some of this stuff could have been stripped out to make it a leaner, more cohesive, and concise film, which is what I think it needs. And I've told this story on a couple of occasions. I used to work something to do with marketing, and I had to used to try and make slogans and stuff. And I would always test a slogan on someone who had nothing to do with it, no relevance to what I didn't know what I was doing, and whether they kind of understood the message. And I feel low budget filmmakers sometimes need to kind of come away from their friends and family and people that are involved and think, oh yeah, it's great, and kind of show this to people that have nothing to do with this, and get the feedback, and then use that feedback to kind of improve. There you go. So as it stands at the moment, I'll give this movie a 4 out of 10. It definitely has some potential, it has some fun elements, and it has some creativity behind it, but I don't think it quite holds together as a kind of a particularly kind of interesting watch as a film in itself. 4 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.